Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
Our, our, our internet just popped on. I feel back in the world.
All
Good.
right. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Leslie Kirby, and I'm the chair of the Jewish Community Relations Committee through the Jewish Federation and Jewish Foundation of Nashville and Middle Tennessee. Our guest today is Sheryl Guinn, who is the president of the NAACP Nashville branch. And we're delighted to have Sheryl talk with us today about the local NAACP and their kind of priorities and focuses and how we might connect better with their community. Sheryl, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Can you start off just by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be in this position?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Sheryl Guinn, and I am the president of the NAACP, actually newly elected president. Um, so we had our elections on, they were completed and results were released on this past Monday. So that would have been, is that the 12th, I guess, the 11th or the 12th? So I am new. Let's see, last year, there were a couple of things that happened because previously I was elected as the second vice president, was able to move up after some things had happened, and we had a resignation of our prior president. So I was president from June of last year, and then I was elected as of Monday. So thank you guys for having me. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you. So today, I guess I wasn't really sure what everyone knew about the NAACP. So I was going to start with how the NAACP basically got started. And actually, I'm kind of glad that I was asked to do this because I did not know a lot of the history of the NAACP. Of course, it's an organization that has been in existence since 1909, and I knew of more of the things that had happened since the civil rights movements beginning in 1950s. But the prior history, I had not delved into as much. So this has allowed for me to delve into that and to understand what the urgency was of beginning the NAACP. So we're talking about in 1908, there was a race riot in Springfield, Illinois. The race riot began because there was a concern, or there was at least some information that there had been an assault by a Black man on a white woman. And so, of course, they are going and looking for this Black man that assaulted this woman, and the mob was inflamed at that point in time. And it led to a whole series of things happening. One thing was basically a burning down of part of Springfield, Illinois, in where the majority of the Black people lived. I'm going to share my screen to the PowerPoint presentation, and I was just explaining to Deborah. I was like, wow, I misread your email. I thought I was just participating in this call today. Didn't realize I was presenting. So a friend of mine thankfully helped me to do a PowerPoint presentation. So this will be my first time. So if you see any glitches, just let me know because I'm working through it. So here we have a picture basically of Springfield, Illinois in 1908. And this kind of shows what the devastation that was happening within the city at that time. So the newspaper had basically published that a Black man had assaulted a white woman, and then there was another report of an assault. So these were two reports, and so basically the white people in the town felt like, something obviously is happening, and we have to, I guess, get rid of all the Black people there. The mob was angry, and they wanted someone to pay for this crime, for these crimes, excuse me. And so they lynched Mr. Scott Burton and Mr. William Donegan. And these were two Black men in the area. However, neither of them had committed a crime at all. Unfortunately, the mob still wasn't satisfied after those two men were murdered, and they were lynched, actually. And the mob continued for approximately 3 days. And they destroyed about 60 homes and engulfing the city in flames for 2 days. The mayhem continued until the Illinois State Militia restored order, and approximately 150 mob participants were arrested, but very few, if any, were actually convicted of any sort of crime. for whatever reason, that even though that was published in the paper, it was never highlighted. It wasn't anything that was talked about significantly, especially in relationship to Illinois state history or into relationship to the history of Springfield, the city itself. But W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a scholar back in that time, and who was also working with the Niagara movement. I'm not sure if you all are familiar with that, but that was also one of the movements that was dealing with civil rights and wanting to have equality. And they met in Canada. I can't remember the name of the city in Canada where they had met. And so with some of the relationships that W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a scholar during that time, made there, they decided to form something called the NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He and some of those members, including, they were just very appalled about the violence that had been taking place, because I don't know if you all are aware, but this wasn't the first race riot that had occurred in 1908. There were several before, and then as I'm going to take you through, there were several after. And so this was something that was happening regularly enough, whereas whole towns were being destroyed, people were being displaced, and nothing was ever being done about it. No one was ever arrested, no one was ever convicted of a crime in certain instances, and it kept perpetuating. And that's what gave rise to the NAACP. So some of the members that joined with W.E.B. Du Bois, and his name, I cannot remember what all of the acronyms, what each letter stands for. I just remember it was William, and then there's two other letters after that, and then it was Du Bois. But he, because they were so appalled, people such as Miss Mary White Ovington, and I actually have a picture of some of them. Give me just a second. Let me go to that slide.
And Sheryl, sorry to interrupt you, but some people are having a hard time seeing the pictures. Could you maybe within the PowerPoints do it as a slideshow instead, so that you get the background stuff out of the way? Thank you.
Sure, let me figure that out. Sure. Let's see.
You should be able to do it at the top of your, if you go across.
Right in the bottom. There, Sheryl, if you go to the bottom of the screen where the main slide is, if you scroll down, you'll see like an icon, like a square.
Yep.
Try to click on that.
I do.
No, not that one, not the one, one not on the right. It's like, no, on, sorry, the other side, the right. Yes, this one.
Slideshow. Okay. Did that help?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, so y'all can see it?
Yep, it looks great.
Okay. So some of the members that helped to start the NAACP were Miss Mary White Ovington, Mr. Oswald Garrison Billiard. Both of these were descendants of famous abolitionists, Mr. William English Walling and Dr. Henry Moskowitz. They issued a call for a meeting regarding racial injustice, and it was approximately 60 people that joined together that created this call. Some of them included W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells Barnett, and Miss Mary Church Terrell. They all signed on to the call, and the NAACP was established on February the 12th, 1909, on the 100th year anniversary of Abraham Lincoln's birth. As we move through history, we see almost a theme that was arising of oppression. There was a form of racial injustice that has basically led to what we have considered now to be institutional racism. So for example, we started off with the race riot that happened in Springfield, Illinois, back in 1908. And it starts from this, which was never proven to actually have been an attack that occurred between the Black man and a white woman. And actually there was a report of 2 such incidences that had occurred. There was never a determination that those things had actually happened. The question then became, was this something that was some sort of and I won't say an illusion, but something that was started based upon something that just wasn't true. And so then we have a whole town that's desecrated and people left feeling helpless and displaced throughout this time in history. Then we move forward after the NAACP has been started, and we have the Tulsa, Oklahoma race riots. There we have another situation of where a white woman is saying that a Black man has assaulted her in some format, and then the town decides, well, this is something that can't happen and we must take it into our own account, and take matters into our own hands and convict, or to in some way show that this person should not have done what they are being accused of, without any proof or without any way of knowing what had actually happened. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, we have this happened in 18 hours, beginning in 1921 on May 31st and June, going through June 1st. 18 hours we have of rioting, where the white people in the town have decided to go to an area called Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and they destroy over 1,256 houses are burned, 215 others are burned but not torched. And all of this ends up happening, and the people are completely displaced. It ends up being anywhere between 100 and 300 people were killed, and more than 8,000 people were made homeless. Then they find out, well, you know, the woman that made the allegations was questionable in the first place, and then later recants and says, well, actually, she doesn't recant. They end up finding out that it was something that wasn't an assault. It was actually, she was an elevator operator, where the young man had come into the elevator and had basically stumbled into her, and this whole thing erupted. But the part that I thought that was very strange was that this was never talked about until the 1990s. So this was left under wraps for several years, for over 70 years, before any light was actually brought to it. Then you start hearing about the things that have happened. So the NAACP was in place at that time, trying to help these situations, whereas people could be safe just living in their own homes. Then we have Mr. Abe Mirapole. He sees the lynching of Mr. J. Thomas Shipp and Abraham Smith. He sees pictures of this lynching back in 1937. He sees these pictures. Let me go to that slide. And he drafts a, here we go. This is Mr. on the left. This is Mr. Abel Mirapole. He drafts a poem called Strange Fruit. After seeing this picture here of these two men who were lynched. This was happening in Indiana. I can't remember the name of the city in Indiana, but this did happen in Indiana in 1937. And I'm sorry, in Marion, Indiana in 1930. So he saw these pictures some 7 years later. And this wasn't, when we're talking about a lynching or something like that that's happening, we're not talking about one or two people. This was a huge spectacle. The crowd was estimated at estimated at 5,000 people, which included women and children. So when the NAACP is saying that, look, we are actively trying to we're actively going towards equality, and we're actively working towards people being able to be safe. These were very, very real issues. These weren't just small things that were happening or things that were not overt, but for the NAACP to have begun because of lynching, and then we see that to continue to happen throughout history, it makes you think, how does that play into a role of institutional racism? And what was the NAACP, or what is the NAACP doing now that lynching is not necessarily the largest of concerns, but how do we move forward from things like this that have been happening? Then we move forward to 1944. There is a young lady by the name of Miss Reese Taylor in Alabama. Now the NAACP at this point in time is growing. It's becoming more of a organized, it's becoming much more organized. Their vision statement at the time is, The vision of the NAACP is to ensure a society in which all individuals have equal rights without discrimination based on race. Now, when you're coming from a legacy or an institution of where lynching was basically approved in most instances, because if there was no one that was being arrested, no one that was being held accountable, I don't know another word that you could have for that other than it having been approved. And they're fighting for equal rights without discrimination based on race. We have no other reason that these things are happening other than the fact that there was one accusation, and the accusation then leads to the murder of several people and then the burning down of their homes. The NAACP continues to be continues their organization in explaining that their objectives are to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of all citizens, to achieve equality of rights and eliminate race prejudice among the citizens of the United States, to remove all barriers of racial discrimination throughout democratic processes, and to seek enactment and enforcement of federal, state, and local laws securing civil rights, to inform the public of the adverse effects of racial discrimination and to seek its elimination, and to educate persons as to their constitutional rights, and to take all lawful action to secure and the exercise thereof, and to take any other lawful action in furtherance of these objectives consistent with the NAACP's Articles of Incorporation and this Constitution. So the NAACP as an organization, even though we have moved past the lynchings, at least them being such a public spectacle, then we move forward, and that was back in 1921, excuse me. And so then we move forward. We now have the rape of Miss Recy Taylor. So this is when the NAACP has now put into place its vision, its objectives. And one of the things that they have is an opportunity for investigation. Miss Recy Taylor was living in Aberville, Alabama. She was on her way home from an evening church service with one of her friends and her friend's son. Some 6 or 7 men in a truck, they accost them. They choose to take Miss Taylor. They gang rape her. And thankfully, her friend that she was with goes and gets the sheriffs. They're out actively looking for her. They finally find her at 3 o'clock that morning. Even with her Miss Taylor reporting the rape, even with her friend corroborating her testimony and her statement, then even one of the young men admits that yes, you know, we did pick her up that night, but we paid her for her services, so we don't see why this is rape. He admits to that. He says who all else was involved, the other 5 men, that were involved, and still there are no charges that come about. The NAACP sends their investigator, who is a name that you all will probably recognize, Ms. Rosa Parks. She goes down to Aberville, Alabama, and she's investigating this crime. She's understanding who these men are. She's bringing publicity to this issue and how this injustice has existed. And all this time, Ms. Recy Taylor is still trying to live with her husband and her daughter. Well, they decide, the town decides, well, we can't have this type of commotion coming about. We don't really want the NAACP here, so they burn her house down. She and her family then have to move in with her father. The NAACP is still actively investigating. They are still trying to bring light to this. So then later they finally arrest these young men, because all of this time these young men are out. They are not incarcerated at any point in time until after the NAACP gets involved, is able to provide some publicity to this situation and to explain that this is so inherently wrong. We have to do something. So they finally have a trial. The all-white male jury meets for 5 minutes, and of course the young men are acquitted. when you have situations like that, you would think that at that time, how does an organization continue to move forward? That's a big blow. They used significant resources to be in Aberville in that time period. They had to have security for Miss Rosa Parks down there doing all of that investigation. They had to have security for Miss Reese Taylor. They had to protect her family, not to mention the assaults and things that were happening to her husband and to her other family members, to try to keep them from having jobs and being able to be financially secure, just to try to keep this thing that was so inherently wrong that happened to her from seeing the light of day. But the organization continues. Then we have the lynching of well, I won't say lynching, but this was definitely the murder of a young child named Emmett Till. So Emmett Till in 1955, he was visiting his family in Money, Mississippi. He was 14 years old at the time. And it's pretty common for some families where, because of the great migration that occurred in the African-American culture, leaving the South and going to the North, it was very common for families in the North to send their children down to the South to be with family during the summertime. And so that's what happened with him. When he was 14, he was going down there for his family. He's hanging out with his cousins, and, they're 14-year-old precocious little boys. They decide to make a noise or in some way say something to one of the white store owners. And at that time, her husband was out of town. And so at some point, she tells her husband once he gets back in town that the boys had made some sort of vocal, I have always heard that it's a whistle, but then some people say it wasn't a whistle. It's just whatever it was something that was verbal that was stated. Never accosted her, never touched her, and then really nothing had happened. And the husband, and I guess he gets some friends, and they kidnap Emmett Till from his uncle's home in Money, Mississippi. They take him, they beat him, they shoot him, they tie a cotton gin fan around his neck, they dump him in the river. Then there's another name that you will recognize, Mr. Medgar Evers. He was a civil rights leader down in Mississippi at the time. Medgar Evers investigated this crime. If it had not been for Medgar Evers, they never would have found Emmett Till's body. He had the volunteers, he made people go and drag that river looking for this young boy's body. They finally find that, and that's the only way that they get the sheriff to actually arrest the gentleman that committed the crime. His mother was a very, very brave soul. She required that once they found her son's body, she wanted an open casket funeral. Miss Till, well, actually her name wasn't Till at the time. That was her previous husband's name who had passed away. Miss Till, Emmett Till's mother, she required that this, and I don't know if you all can see this picture on the right-hand side of Emmett Till as a young boy at 14. And then this was the picture this is what they saw in the casket at his funeral. She did not, the decomposition of his body had been so significant that the funeral home wasn't able to repair it, was not able to make him presentable for an open casket funeral. But she wanted people to see, this is what happened to her child, and it was unjustified, and no one has paid for it. There was a trial that ensued in Mississippi for these gentlemen. I guess let me go back to the funeral. They said that you could actually smell his body blocks away. She had the funeral in Chicago, not in Mississippi. But she wanted people to see, because she wanted people to be just as outraged as she was. And that was her only child at the time. Now, then we get to the trial for the men who actually committed this crime. Of course, Medgar Evers and the NAACP are still heavily involved in this. They are watching this. They have their own magazine called the Crisis Magazine. They are working with the newspapers in that area, making sure that things are published and that this is becoming public, so that people understand this is what we're fighting for when we say we're fighting for equality. They have a trial, and unfortunately these men were acquitted, because at that time, we're talking about 1955, maybe 1957 by this time, they do not have the scientific means to be able to do any sort of DNA testing or anything of that nature to prove that this is actually Emmett Till. And that's how these men were acquitted. So this trial at least got a little bit farther than the one for Miss Reese Taylor. At least there was some sort of deliberation. At least there was evidence and things like that that were presented, and there was actually something for people to consider. But because they could not make that determination, then those men were definitely not convicted of that crime. Then as we move forward to, let's go back to 2006, when Harold Ford Jr. was running against Bob Corker for the United States Senate here in Tennessee. I don't know how many of you all remember this, but I remember this very vividly. There was a commercial. Harold Ford Jr. was not expected to do very well against Bob Corker. Bob Corker is, of course, a millionaire. He had unlimited resources to be able to run his campaign. Harold Ford Jr. is out of Memphis, and he has a very well-known family within politics. But his money definitely was not nearly as long as Bob Corker's, nor were his reaches as far as being able to raise money for his campaign. Not to mention at the time, Tennessee, of course, was a red state. Harold Ford Jr. was a very well-known Democrat from a very well-known Democratic family. But when he ran, he was doing well. He was giving Bob Corker a run for his money, and the Republicans were scared. The Republicans ran an ad, and I will never forget this ad because it was so shocking. The ad was basically like when you go, when you see on late night TV and you see they're interviewing people on the street. They interviewed people on the street, and the people were giving very sarcastic things as to why they didn't want Harold, why you shouldn't vote for Harold Ford Jr. And so there was one clip of a woman. It was a clip of a white woman whose shoulders were bare. And in that clip, it said, controversy erupted over one of the people featured. This is an article that was written about this commercial. The controversy erupted over one of the people featured, an attractive white woman, bare-shouldered, who declares that she met Harold Ford Jr. at a Playboy party, and closes the commercial by looking into the camera and saying, "Harold, call me." I remember the first time I saw that commercial, I said, he's going to lose, because what happens, there has been basically institutionalized racism from the time of the early 1900s and even before, that you can scare people by saying Black men are coming after white women and they're going to come after them by force. That has been the theme through everything that I've stated today. That has been the catalyst for absolutely ruining whole towns, murdering people, lynching people, is to say that the Black men are going to come by force and take white women. I didn't make it up. All I'm doing is going off of the pattern that has been laid. And in 2006, after all of this work, after the NAACP has been in existence, after all of these liberal organizations, they were able to make that commercial. And every person that I knew that Harold Ford Jr. at that point had no chance of winning that election. It was stated that Bob Corker tried to distance himself from that commercial because of the racial undertones that were there. There were supporters of Harold Ford Jr. that tried to explain that because of this racism that existed, this is what you all are. Please do not change your minds about the man that you had already decided to vote for. Go back to the man that you know. Do not let this sway you. Harold, and I will never forget, Harold Ford Jr. was on trying to defend his character in saying that, look, I'm a single man, I like women, and I like football, because this was during, it was the Playboy party or whatever, was during the Super Bowl. And he sounded, even in his voice, he sounded defeated, because he knew, I believe he knew, I don't know for certain, but I believe he knew how much that could affect him. We go through all of this, and then still in 2020, we have Miss Amy Cooper in Centennial Park in Central Park in New York City. What does she do? She gets angry at a Black man in Central Park because he told her something about the leash law or regarding her dog. She calls the police, sounds afraid, almost cries, and says, "This Black man is here, and he's assaulted. He has assaulted me." She knew exactly what to say, the exact tone to say it in, so that the police would come running. And had that man not had a video of everything that had happened, he would have been arrested and they would have manhandled him. And we have no idea how that would have affected him later. We don't even know if that man would have been alive, because what happened, the issue that occurred here, and what I believe is that there isn't some class that teaches women or teaches people in general how to be racist. I think that what happens is that over time, things are happening that become accepted. And when these things become accepted, then it's not something that people are talking about anymore. And so when they happen, they are able to happen continuously, and they are then accepted as just what the way of life is. For example, I looked up the definition of institutional racism. Institutional racism, also known, which is also referred to as systemic racism, is a form of racism that is embedded as normal practice within society or an organization. It can lead to issues such as discrimination in criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, and education, among other issues. It becomes then embedded in everything. So then we look at situations where we have come a long way. At least we are not having public lynchings anymore, where we have 5,000 people in attendance, where we have women and children. We have situations where there is not still the separation of separate but equal, as has been in the past. We have moved farther, whereas at least people are now talking about what has happened. And then then the question becomes, well, what role does the NAACP now play that we are not having those overt situations, those overt racist situations that are happening? It's because of the thing of institutional racism that has arisen. I don't think that there was anyone that taught Amy Cooper that, look, if someone is doing something that you don't like and they're Black, then you use your arsenal of crying and saying that they assaulted you in order to have police presence or in order to encourage someone to assist you. I don't think anything like that has ever been taught to anyone. But because these things have consistently happened and they have been allowed to happen and they have basically been approved because there was never any condemnation for it, that's the type of thing that the NAACP is still fighting. That's how the NAACP's position is, that, look, we are still fighting for equality because there are certain things that just aren't changing. We can take what happened last week. Last week, we had an insurrection of people who came to our nation's capital, one of the places supposed to be the most secure on this planet, other than probably the Pentagon. And they were able to bust through the doors, go into where all of our congressmen and our Senate leaders are, and just run amok. We're hearing now that they had human feces on the walls. We're hearing now that they had the police officers that were there were concerned about getting out with their lives because they were being trampled. Well, I won't say trampled, but smothered and smushed up against the doors that they were trying to protect from being opened. We now have, and then we have one officer who said, and I just heard this morning on Good Morning America, he said that he got separated from his group of officers and they were passing him. The crowd was literally passing him back and saying, get him, get his gun, shoot him. Let's shoot him with his own gun. He said that they were actually using, whether it was his taser or his stun gun, on him while they had him separated from the other officers. These people are just now being arrested, or at least some of them are just now being arrested. We still have several that nothing is going to happen to. But then we do that in dark contrast to what happened with Black Lives Matter, or what happened when there were marches where there were rubber bullets that were sprayed on people who were actually peacefully protesting. We have, and it's horrific that these things are able to be seen, and we actually have to do a split screen for people to understand why We are upset why there is still this talk about the need for equality. And that's what the NAACP is trying to bring in saying that, look, there is this need. We have 21 standing committees that deal with the housing, that deal with education inequality, that deal with our women in the NAACP and women and children's issues, deal with our health, because there is inequality in all of these. And because of that, the NAACP continues to strive towards that equality. And that's the goal of the organization. And we want anyone who is interested in equality existing to please come and join us, be a member, link up with our different committees so that we can continue to bring light to the subject, so that people can talk about what their fears are or their lack of understanding and wanting to understand, because that's what we are about. We are about the education. We are about helping people to understand and helping all of us to understand how to do this better, how to be better people and to be loving and caring people to each other, so that we never go back to the things that have happened before, and so that we continue to move forward and give our children an absolute opportunity to live this utopian idea of what it is to be an American citizen.
That's a very powerful history and story, and I think gives us a better sense of what led you to the work that you're doing right now. We're hoping to be better allies with your community, and that was one of the goals for bringing you here today. To bring us kind of a little bit more locally focused, can you tell us, a little bit about your current priorities here in Nashville as you take over the Nashville chapter of the NAACP?
Sure. So, of course, we have just started our new administration. And one of the big focuses, of course, is education. I have absolutely no idea how our children are surviving in virtual school. If it were me, I would have flunked out a long time ago, or either my mother would have to have taken off from work to be at home with us, because there's no way in the world that I can see that I would have gotten all of that work done. I don't know how they're doing it. And I am concerned. So education is a big concern for us at this point. We've got of course, here in Nashville, we have charter schools. Charter schools are only able to exist if there is a failing school in a neighborhood. So a lot of the charter schools that I have seen, and I have not done the statistics on that, but a lot of the charter schools that I have seen are in the more impoverished areas, which that also have a high population of Black and brown people. And what I'm seeing that's becoming the trend, or at least what's happening, is that we have a charter school in the area that is supposed to help with the failing school, but then we end up with two substandard schools. So the school that was the failing school remains failing, then the charter school doesn't, whether it's because of a lack of funding, whether it's because of a lack of a number of students, it still isn't able to bring that change in the level of education into that community. And so now we have two substandard schools in the area, and still several children that are there that still aren't receiving the education that they need. Now we're in virtual school and been in it for over almost a year at this point. So education is huge. Finding equality in education is huge right now. There are a lot of our students who, even with the reduction in the fee for Wi-Fi access, are still having a hard time getting on and staying on, and being able to complete their assignments. Sometimes because there's so much that may be going on in their homes. And I'm not saying that these things are necessarily bad things that are going on, but I've heard of several teachers who have said, some of these parents have, 7 and 8 kids in the house. And we're talking about a house that may be 1,200 square feet. How 7 or 8 children are able to all get on different computers and concentrate is beyond comprehension to me. And it's also beyond comprehension to their parents, because they don't have any good solutions. I've had teachers who have complained that they've had students who have literally had to go into a closet in their home to try to get their work done. And the children, these are elementary students, and they're literally putting their heads in their hands and just sighing because they can't concentrate for their test. And it's not because anything wrong is going on in their home. It's just not every parent can take off from work. So sometimes there are other children that are coming in, because then there's at least one adult that can help them and make sure that they're getting their work done. That's one of our big focuses, is how do we get that? How can we help and assist with that? So we are definitely looking at working with the school board and any other teachers that have suggestions as far as what we can do, whether that means as far as purchasing laptops, whether that means as far as helping to pay for time when they're going to Wi-Fi access, whether it's, you know, taking a family under our wing, whatever we can do to help with that, and working with teachers to help these students to learn. That's one of our biggest focuses. I don't want to just keep talking, but one of the other things that has happened, of course, we now have a new police chief. Well, under our previous chief, whose name escapes me for some reason, there was a case that had taken place, and I don't know if you all had seen that on the news, but there was a young man who was a security guard at the Pharmacy Burger restaurant in East Nashville. And there was a horrible shootout that had occurred on the street in front of, or in the vicinity of, that Pharmacy Burger restaurant. Well, the gentleman who was the victim was running away from the shootout. Thankfully, he had escaped 3 assailants that were shooting at him. He had escaped them, was running down the street away from the incident and away from the Pharmacy Burger restaurant. Well, the security guard sticks his head out of the door and shoots this man in the back of the head as he's running away. Then this security guard, he must have already applied with the Davidson County Police Department, because shortly after this murder, he is then accepted into the police academy and had been a police officer with Metro Nashville Police Department for more than a year by the time the NAACP received word of this from the attorneys that were representing the young man's family. So the security guard is Mr. Nathan Glass. The young man that was murdered was Mr. D'Angelo Knox. D'Angelo Knox's mother had instituted a civil lawsuit against Pharmacy Burger and the security guards and the security company. And they found a video. The video shows that Mr. D'Angelo Knox was ambushed. He was shot at by at least 3 different people. He was running away. And Nathan Glass comes out of the Pharmacy Burger restaurant, shoots this man in the back of the head, and then goes back into before retreating back into the restaurant, people that were trying to render aid to Mr. D'Angelo Knox, such as a school bus driver, or an MTA bus driver, I can't remember which one now, and another woman who was parked on the street, he tells both of them, no, go. He comes back. They interview him. The police officers interview him. They take that information to the DA's office. The DA's office reviews it, and they say, we're not going to bring any charges. He was never charged. He was never arrested. Served over a year on the Metro Nashville Police Department. The information is brought to the NAACP. We do a press conference, and everybody is wondering, the reporters are wondering, the society is wondering, how does this happen that this man is never arrested and never taken and never required to answer for the crime that we clearly saw on video? The DA said, well, I didn't think the video was clear. When you see this video, it couldn't have been any clearer than if this was a movie that was shot and was played at Opry Mills. It couldn't have been any clearer. It was very clear, step by step, what occurred. We do the press conference, then finally, the DA's office is able to see what happened. The DA's office then finally brings charges against Nathan Glass. He was finally arrested and indicted. And so now he can at least go before the court regarding what we believe to be just a blatant crime. Now, how he was able to serve on the Metro Police Department for over a year and no one questioned it, He was interviewed by police detectives, which means these were either his colleagues or his superiors. All of these people knew, and they still allowed him to be out here to be able to carry a gun, to carry a badge, to remove a person's freedom. We have no idea. But that's one of the other things that we are working on with the Community Oversight Board, as well as with any other interested entities, whether that's going to be the DA's office or whether that's going to be the police department itself, to understand how someone like that is hired and then trusted, even after others know what he's done, to then police you and I. And they feel perfect. And obviously they approved it. They must feel perfectly safe with him. I'm terrified with someone like him being on the police department, because what does that mean? How can anyone trust that he's going to do the right thing? So those are two big things that we are very concerned about.
All right. So can you tell us just briefly, and then I think we have some questions from the audience as well. What are some of the specific things that we could do as a community that would be helpful to your cause?
Oh, wonderful. Start the conversation. Start the conversation. I say that twice because sometimes people do not want to talk about things that are uncomfortable to them. And talking about things such as racism is uncomfortable. Just like talking about domestic violence or sexual assault is uncomfortable. Talking about racism is uncomfortable, but not necessarily antagonizing anyone, but having that loving discussion with people. It may be a friend, it may be a family member, and discussing maybe something that was said or something that was done or a reaction that was made. That's how you start that. This didn't happen overnight. Racism didn't happen overnight. We just went through over 100 years of things that have happened and that have basically been approved because no one condemned them. We've just been through 100 years of that just in this conversation. So this didn't happen in just one instance or just one incident. And neither is the change going to happen that way. But starting the conversation is one way. The other way is joining with different causes that you think will assist in equality. Joining with the NAACP, joining with or paying attention, not just joining with, but listening to things that are happening with the Community Oversight Board, listening to things that are happening in our council meetings, speaking up for our children who are in underserved communities. Those are things that are going to start changing the way society is viewed. But I think that conversation starts everything. Because when you're talking, when someone, me having the conversation sometimes doesn't resonate as when you are having the conversation with someone that you love or that you care about, that respects your opinion. They don't know me from Adam, but when you say something, it makes a difference. Just like if I say something to someone that I know and love about domestic violence, that makes all the difference in the world, as opposed to if you are talking to them about domestic violence. We're talking about something that's so institutional and so ingrained that we have to start with those small conversations.
That's something that we've actually been focusing on as a community. We've started a number of book discussion groups, reading Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist and things like that, trying to get people in our community to go to better equip themselves to have those conversations with people that they need to. Someone posted in the chat a question around the violence at the Capitol. So raising questions about the extent to which there are openly violent white nationalists and white supremacists among police officers. So from the Nathan Glass case, it sounds like that might be a particular problem here in Nashville. Do you think that's the case? And do you think there's an opportunity now to better raise the issue because of the visible national issues that we're having around this?
Oh, wow. You asked two questions. Can you tell me the first question again?
So do you think it's particularly a big problem in Nashville? And then talk about opportunities. Does the national scene give us an opportunity to act locally?
I do think that there is an issue in Nashville. My day job is as an attorney. We get calls often of, and when I say we, I'm talking about myself and my colleagues, we get calls often about people having grievances with the police department. Not every grievance is, valid, but it's very scary, the number of the ones that are. More often than not, it's a situation of, where there is a stop by the police, and the stop is not based on any legitimate issue. It's really something that Gideon's Army, which is another organization here in Nashville, has talked about very vividly in their report, Driving While Black. Now, growing up, I always heard that term, and it was an acronym called DWB, Driving While Black. And what that meant was that officers would often stop you just to see, what you're doing, whether you're in the wrong neighborhood, whether you're in the wrong car, whether you're riding with with someone that they believe to be the wrong person. And they stop you to see, what they're going to find. It's on a fishing expedition. And those oftentimes turn horribly, horribly wrong. And that's where the conversation. So yes, I do believe that is a problem in Nashville as far as institutional racism, as far as people being treated differently, even as we see the comparison with what happened at the Capitol, as far as any sort of violence and things of that nature. Yes, I do think that is something that it definitely exists here in Nashville. Do I think that having it on the national stage makes it different for us makes it a better opportunity for us to be able to talk about it now? Absolutely. I think that by having it on the national stage, we then see that this isn't just isolated to just our community, which is the basic news that we watch. Once we see it on the national stage, we realize how big and how widespread and how overreaching that it is, and that it is that still that term of the institutional racism that exists. It's something that minorities that Black people that I know of have complained about since I've been born. And getting people to now, because I was speaking to someone else about this before, that we have often felt like white people felt that we were just making things up, that what we felt and what we saw wasn't realistic, that it was old, slavery doesn't exist anymore, so that shouldn't be a problem. Segregation doesn't exist anymore, so the things that you are complaining about shouldn't be a problem. That can be seen as easily when we're talking about affirmative action. When the discussion of affirmative action arose in the late 60s, early 70s, people were not seeing why that needed to happen. Then you had other people, even Black people saying, well, why do we need affirmative action? If we're working just as hard and able to do the same things that everybody else is able to do, we're going to be able to accomplish the same things that they're able to accomplish. Even with those arguments still lingering on today, then we see something like what happened last week, and people still say, well, I don't necessarily know that institutional racism exists. And it's like, how can you not see the nexus? Having it on that national scale helps us to see the nexus between institutional racism and the complaints that Black people have been having for well over 30 years. Yes, the overt parts are not here as much anymore. Well, at least they weren't until Trump came into office. He came into office, the overt parts came back to the surface. But prior to him, things were still sort of subtle. And this shows us that the subtle isn't that subtle. Just because things aren't openly being said, or there aren't open race riots, or there aren't open all-white juries that are convicting people, just because those things aren't existing anymore doesn't mean that your feelings don't encourage how you handle things. Your feelings and how you understand things to be in this world dictate how you handle certain situations. And having this on the national stage helps us to evaluate, am I looking at this through the right lens?
All right. There was a note in here about an issue that we definitely need to grapple with internally, that the problem with small conversations is that we all live kind of in bubbles with people who think like us. So for us, that's one of the goals that we have, is to try to convene conversations through our organization that are difficult, but that we can have in a civil and respectful way, and hopefully find common ground. That's the goal anyway. Another question here about, in terms of racist policies, if you had to select just a few things that would make the biggest difference, so bang for your buck over the short term, what's most important to you right now?
Health. Right now it's health. COVID-19 is literally annihilating whole generations of people. I have seen, I mean, and I know I'm not the only person. I'm sure several of you have seen it completely wipe out a whole family line. And that's what I'm seeing. I don't know where, I really hate that rhetoric came into play, that COVID-19 was in some way a hoax. And some people just stopped taking it so seriously. But in the short term, if we can get that started, because I think COVID-19, I do agree with the reports that I have seen, it has shown a significant light on the disparities between the haves and the have-nots when it comes to healthcare. It has shown a significant light on the disparities between who are the haves and the have-nots. Unfortunately, a large number of the people who are economically disadvantaged are Black and brown, which means that their healthcare is substandard if they're even able to afford it. So if we can get COVID-19 under control and allow for that, and for the light that has been shown on that to then allow us to put things in place so that we can reform healthcare, that would be my number one. Next would be education. These kids cannot have education if their parents are not able to be there with them through this virtual. I mean, kids need their parents, is what I'm trying to say. Kids need their parents. If their parents are dying from COVID or stretched so thin or can't afford to put food on their tables, they are totally distracted and the kids are not learning at all. So if we can take care of health, then we can get to education and helping our students figure out how to make up for these past over a year of being in virtual learning. Then next, wow, dealing with the economic disparities, I think that would be huge. One committee that we have with the NAACP is the Economic Development Committee. I have seen statistics of anywhere from a 3 to 4% rate of ethnic minority-owned businesses that actually receive government contracts to perform work. 3 to 4%. I don't know anywhere that is an acceptable amount of anything, except for money that I have to pay out. If I only have to pay out 3 to 4% of something, then I'm happy with that. But anything where we are saying that that our government, our local and even federal government is working on any sort of bridging that economic disparaging gap, of bridging that, having numbers of 3 to 4% of ethnic minority-owned companies actually receiving these government contracts is dismal at best. What does that mean? That means that these companies who would be able to employ others within the community are not able to do that because they're not qualifying for these things. Then that further means that 97 to 96% of the contracts are going to ethnic minorities, to those who are of the majority, excuse me, I was speaking in double negatives and that's never good, but who are going to the majority. And when they are going to the majority, you're leaving out a whole area of the population because, like we've discussed, institutional racism does exist. That means that people are oftentimes hiring people that they can identify with. And if you can't identify with me, you're choosing someone who looks like you. And I'm not saying that there's necessarily anything that's wrong with that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't hire people that you identify with. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that you have to broaden the horizons and give people an opportunity. And if we're not there yet as a society where we can do that, because I think a lot of us are still segregated in our own selves and through our own means. We choose to be around people who look like us and who think the way that we do. We have to give the opportunity to those minority organizations, to those minority companies that are going to hire people that look like them. If we don't, we're still not going to bridge that gap. All of the affirmative action in the world is not going to bridge that gap if we're not giving the companies the opportunity to thrive or to at least compete.
Okay.
And when you're only working with 3 or 4% of the population, you're not giving anybody an opportunity to compete.
Very true. I just want to touch base with you and make sure we're at 1 o'clock. There's still a few questions. Are you able to stay on a bit longer and answer the rest of the questions, or do you need to wrap up now?
First of all, I am surprised you all are interested because it was deep in the beginning. It was real deep.
It was fascinating to us to hear the history, and you have a lot of passion about what you're doing, which we very much appreciate. So
yes, I'm happy to stay on. I thank you all for being so kind to me because it was rough in the beginning.
We appreciate it. We had another question about the riots specifically. So the question is, were they pro-Trump or was it really an anti-Semitic, anti-racist, anti-minority protest? And as you think about that, think about going forward. So what is it that we need? Is it a political problem that we have, or is it a white nationalist problem that we have? And how do we think about repair? So where do we need to best direct our energies, in your view, around repair and moving forward as a society?
It has been my opinion that Donald Trump brought to light things that some people were already feeling. He gave them a safe place to express their feelings and basically told them there would be no consequences for your actions. I think that then allowed for things like what happened last week to boil over. I think that going forward, how do we fix it? God, it's such an overwhelming problem. I honestly don't know how you fix it. The suggestions that I have, they sound so menial, but to me, they mean so much, because when I'm saying have those small conversations, I'm talking about changing someone's heart. Those people that were insurrectionists last week, their hearts and their minds were so hardened to even feel justified to be able to do what they did. I don't know that changing any laws or any rules would change that specifically. Because then still, remember, we've talked a lot about institutional racism. That's something that is ingrained. That's something that when I was growing up, we referred to as a stereotype. When you're stereotyping people, that's part of that institutional racism. So when things are that ingrained in someone, that comes with changing someone's heart and their mind. And I know that that's not anything concrete, because I don't know that any of this is concrete. This isn't as simple as, writing a law on the book or changing, police practices or changing police practices. It's not that simple. This is more more emotional, I think, than anything. I think that I have often heard that when there is a war, even though if one side has all of the artillery and has none of the passion, but the other side may not necessarily have as much of the artillery, but has all of the passion, the side that has the majority of the artillery better watch out, because those people are coming and they are going to be relentless and they are not going to let up because they have something at stake. In this instance, I feel the same way about those insurrectionists. Their position was our whole livelihood is going to be changed because this election was faulty, this election was rigged, and we can't stand for this. Right or wrong, passionately, they had it. That was something that they felt and they honestly believed. The only way to change that is by changing someone's idea and changing their heart. And that doesn't happen in writing. That comes from talking, that comes from showing, that comes from time. So I wish there was an easy fix. I don't know one. I think that's almost, and I akin this to domestic violence. Domestic violence has been in existence since the beginning of time. And it has evolved to the point now where at least we are recognizing that it's wrong, because there was a long period of time where that was just looked at, oh, well, that's just between that couple. You know, that's not anything that the law or anybody else should be involved in.
And in
But
other
now
parts of the world, it still is.
You're exactly right. In some parts of the world, it still is. And even when I first started practicing law in 2006. At our Metropolitan Davidson County Courthouse, the domestic violence docket and the order protection docket, those were called the love dockets. And I'm not making this, I promise I'm not making this up. They were literally called the love dockets. And when someone expressed that to me, I said, who's, because I didn't hear it at first. I said, who's loving who? And he said, no, this is called the love docket. The OP dockets, order protection, and the domestic dockets, they're called the love dockets because, you know, and it's mostly, the victims were usually women. The women would usually refuse to prosecute or refuse to testify, or there was some spat that was happening between them. And I'm not gonna sugarcoat this. Sometimes people were bringing false allegations because they know they could, whether it was because it was a custody case that was going on, whether someone was mad because the other person was cheating. There were all kinds of things that were going on. But to call that the love docket, when the majority of those cases were serious domestic assault cases, where someone was actually being punched in the face, where someone was actually being kicked, where a gun was actually being pulled on someone, where someone's cell phone was being taken from them as they were trying to call 911 to be safe. For that in this millennium to still be called the love docket, I don't know how to fix that any more than I know how to fix racism, other than by starting with those small conversations. That is those conversations that you have to have by talking and changing someone's heart, because the law is on the books that domestic assault is wrong. They've even increased things to the point where if there's strangulation that's involved in the domestic assault, then it's a felony. It hasn't stopped it. So I don't know how to change racism other than loving each other. And I know that that's not enough. It's not anything that we can put our hands on and do it, but you have to love each other. We have to, and I'm not saying we have to love each other. That's how that starts. It doesn't start anywhere else.
Definitely. We had a reminder here that a lot of people are shocked right now, and really they shouldn't be. And so we need to keep reminding people of things that are under the surface. There was nothing new that happened last week in terms of the concepts driving it, even though it was a different manifestation. Someone wants to know if you see a potential for Tennessee to become the next Georgia in terms of mobilization and turnout and all of that.
I have no idea. I really don't. Is that something that I would like to see? I say yes because, and this is not from a political standpoint. This is more from because right now, in my opinion, only in mine, I feel that the Republican Party is tainted from the insurrectionists. I believe that they have identified with the Republican Party, and because they have and that they have basically adopted that as their own. And because of that, yes, I want to see Tennessee change, because I don't think that any sort of equality can happen when insurrectionists have adopted a party and their views and their values are becoming ingrained in that party. So in that sense, yes, I want to see Tennessee turn blue, because I am scared to death of what happens if it stays red.
It seems like in Nashville, at least, we made good strides in the past election with getting a big increase in minority registration and turnout. It would be great to see that expand to the rest of the state as well, so that people are able to make their voices heard, whatever side they're on. But
you remind me of something. I forgot to talk about the good stuff that so during the last election, the NAACP worked hard. We really did. Now, we were starting that campaign probably around in June, and would have done it a little earlier, but some things had happened administratively in our branch. So I had just taken the presidency from excuse me, I'm speaking over myself. Our president of our national branch had resigned in June, and that's when I came into office. We had to hit the ground running to get things in place. We did a 10,000 postcards that we sent out to people, encouraging them to look up their registration and make sure that they were able and registered to vote here in Davidson County. Then we did another campaign of over 20,000 cards. And these cards had handwritten messages on them so that it would encourage people to vote, giving them a number to call, so yes, NAACP has been very active with that. And so are we willing to join up with other organizations to hit as many houses, as many people as we possibly can to make it so that we are able to turn Tennessee blue? We would love to. Absolutely love to. And let me remind, the NAACP as an organization is a nonpartisan organization. So when I'm saying making it blue, in my mind, when I'm thinking about it under NAACP standards, is that we want to go for making it so that everyone has an opportunity to vote, that everyone has an opportunity to understand what they're voting for, and so that everyone understands, is educated on the process, and is not in any way being turned away.
Makes sense. I think we've gone through the questions. I know that we have a couple of people on the call who want to touch base in the future to talk about the history of the Black Jewish Alliance and hopefully continuation of that, at least here locally. So we will be in touch to maybe schedule a follow-up with you. But I do want to thank you for joining us today. I think it's been fascinating and great to get to know you, and we have great wishes for you in your new term as president. I do want to let the people on the call know, including you, that on February 11th, we're actually doing an event with Integrity First for America. They're the group who, after the Charlottesville protest in 2017, I believe, they are prosecuting they're not prosecuting the individuals involved, but they're actually filing lawsuits against the white nationalist organizations that drove and organized the protests. And so we'll have them with us. John Siegenthaler will be moderating that event. So interviewing them to talk about the status of that lawsuit and also what they hope to accomplish with it in terms of holding people accountable, which is very salient given current events for all of us. So again, thank you so much, Sheryl, for joining us.
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Sheryl, I think that may have been why. And first of all, for not knowing that you were expected to present today, you did
You did a fabulous job.
Well, thanks.
a job, and it was so heartfelt. And as you said, it is the passion that makes the difference. And your passion today really came through. I think part of the confusion was I was messaging you on two things, both about this call and to see if the NAACP Nashville branch would join us as a sponsor for that IFA event. And in that, you would be a participant. So that may have been some of the confusion. And I hope, if you want, I'll call you after, but I hope that we can add you to our growing list of sponsors for that event on February 11th.
Okay.
But that, I think, was why it was that for that one, you will be a participant. But wow, you did an amazing job of shifting gears and becoming our presenter for today. And you have shared so well for us and spoken so honestly to us. And I think that is part of the lesson here. Until we can speak honestly with each other, until we can tell the truth, our democracy simply has no chance. Our democracy will only survive if we can be honest and true and tell the truth to each other and to our leaders. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I will be in touch so that we can continue to follow up on this relationship.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah.
Again, and thank you to everyone on the call for joining us as well. So,
And thank you, Leslie, for moderating.
for sure.
You reduced my nerves.
Oh, good. I'm glad you did a fantastic job, and we look forward to working with you again.
Thank you. Thank